Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. We are striking up the live stream at 1 o'clock Eastern time on a Saturday. Always talking college football here. Please subscribe, like, and comment. It supports the effort that we have to bring you the best discussion, debate, and analysis of college football and the audio versions. If you're running around doing errands and chores and working out and so forth and would like to catch the audio, all the video that you see here at Mark Rogers TV, the audio is posted of those exact shows at Google Play, Podbean, iTunes, and Stitcher. We will strike up the live chat and get your comments and questions, so please join the discussion, as you are always welcome to provide your suggestions on content and, of course, your comments and questions about college football. A special guest joins us today, and I'll get into why he's a special guest, but he's joined us a number of times here at Mark Rogers TV to discuss the Power Five, the Heisman races, the national championship race, and so forth. He is the Gridiron expert, so I invite you to join him on his YouTube channel as well. I believe he has just started a Twitter page as well, so I would direct you to go to the Gridiron expert on Twitter as well. Alex Galbraith joins us, and Alex and I have had a number of great discussions on college football. He does an outstanding job of his base core of content in projecting the conference races, the predictions for the season, and the Heisman odds and so forth. Alex, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on again. Definitely.
This is always a good time. And at whatever point we connected on social media, I started to watch your content and intrigued always by the analysis of the projections toward what's going to happen here for this particular season here in 2018. Of course, are you starting to kind of dive into your prognostications at this point?
I am. We just started our game-by-game predictions for all the Power 5 teams just yesterday. We finished up Alabama and Auburn. So we're planning on posting multiple predictions a day. We're going to go through all the Power 5 teams and the independents. So it's basically from now until the start of the 2018 season, it's going to be all predictions all the time.
So you're knocking out all the Power 5, any group of 5 in there?
I actually plan on doing a conference recap for the group of 5. So not game-by-game predictions for them, but showing my projected records and projected conference standings for all the group of 5 conferences.
There you go, folks. You go to the Gridiron expert here on YouTube and check out his predictions right there. I have yet to release mine. I've made the statement many times. It seems as though it's that Wednesday night or Thursday afternoon just prior to that Thursday night opener of the college football season in late August that I'm still wrapping up my predictions. I'm just one to not pull the trigger until I've got all the news and information that I can stuff into my head. But I should do exactly what you and others do and forecast out sometime early summer to get the jump on that and get those predictions released because, yeah, that's a whole lot of fun and people want to know what the picks are going to be. It's similar week to week in regards to my college football predictions where those noon games hit here on the East Coast every Saturday, and I'm out here streaming live at 11:30, 11:45, releasing my predictions at that point. Just tough for me to make a call on Tuesday or Wednesday, but that might have to be the direction we go to benefit the channel, of course. And you know about that. And Alex has done a great job in building his channel. We would like everyone to know, before we start our discussion on the Power 5, the Heisman race, and so forth across the country, that Alex is going to be joining me here at Mark Rogers TV. So continue to go to the Gridiron expert on YouTube for his analysis and predictions and prognostications. It'll all be right there, but he's going to share some content with us and also help me behind the scenes with marketing and social media. So we're excited. We've got a game plan together, and I'm sure Alex is going to be a tremendous benefit and asset to what we're doing here at Mark Rogers TV. So Alex, I appreciate you accepting my offer. I threw out an offer you may have seen on social media for those that follow me on Twitter and on Facebook. A number of you that may have seen my offer for some help and support that I've thrown out from time to time, and Alex jumped on that. And we already know each other to a certain extent, so So I was glad to see, Alex, your response. That's for sure.
No, absolutely. I'm extremely excited about it, and I'm glad you asked for the opportunity. I'm thrilled to be here.
So, Alex, I threw it out to the masses a few nights ago in regards to the Power 5 races. I know you have some thoughts about who may jump out as a dark horse and possibly make a college football playoff appearance. I anticipate and can't wait for college football, just like the rest of us that love the sport. That Alabama, Georgia, Miami, Clemson, Ohio State, Wisconsin kind of chalk prediction I can't get away from. I hope that somebody's able to break through in those three conferences, because right now I think Clemson has a better lock than anyone in any division in college football. I think Georgia's is very close. It's right about the same type margin for error in regards to their talent, their schedule, everything that they have in play over their nearest competition, which appears to be South Carolina and could be Florida in Dan Mullen's first year. Alabama would be close, although Auburn's obviously an extremely good team, and LSU's, Texas A&M, and Mississippi State certainly have their strong points. But I'm hoping that it's not as close to chalk as it would appear right now, Alex, with the SEC, Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, Miami, and the ACC, and the Big Ten with Ohio State and Wisconsin, which, of course, in that brutal Big Ten East, there will be some other teams that have something to say. So just your thought about possibly some other teams breaking through.
Yeah, you're right about the SEC, ACC, Big Ten. That's everybody's general consensus, and everybody what thinks is going to happen. It's going to be another Alabama, Georgia, more than likely in the SEC. I agree with you on that. In the Big Ten, Ohio State, Wisconsin, that's what a lot of people would think, but I'm going to say there might be one minor dark horse in the Big Ten, and that's going to be Michigan State, who can potentially challenge Ohio State. And the only reason I say this is because I've learned over the past couple of years to never doubt a Mark D'Antonio team. He always gets his team ready, plays extremely well. I know a couple of years ago they had a very down year, going 3-9, but you saw what they did last year, bouncing back, and I believe it was 10-3 with a win over Washington State in the Holiday Bowl. So this year he returns 19 starters back from that team. Very well could have been an 11-win team. I think they had one minor upset in there to Northwestern. So it was a very close game at that. But 19 starters back, including their quarterback, their running back, and L.J. Scott. And Mark D'Antonio knows how to coach his defense as well. So I can see Michigan State really, really threatening Ohio State in the Big Ten, giving Michigan a fight. I know a lot of people are high on Michigan this year with Shea Patterson and a lot of starters back on that Wolverines team. Defense should be a little bit better, but I would not be surprised to see Michigan State come out as champion in the Big Ten. I really think they could give a lot of people a fight, and not a lot of people are talking about them right now.
Yeah, so if you know anything about the history of Michigan State football, from the time I started watching at least, we're talking, do I want to date myself here, late 70s, early 80s, Michigan State for the longest period of time seemed to be a program that should have played at a higher level. But except for peaking every so often, for example, 1999, they went 10-2 with Plaxico Burress at wide receiver, finished in the top 10 in the nation, beat Florida in the Citrus Bowl. There were very brief blips like that. Generally, when there was an 11-game season in college football, which takes us to sometime in the early 2000s, it was always 6-5, 7-4, 5-6, 6-5. Track Michigan State football for decades, and that's what you got. They were just a barely over 500 program. Mark D'Antonio takes over, and suddenly they're playing in Citrus Bowls and Outback Bowls, and they're immediately good. They're immediately top 15 good after about a season. They're, of course, famously beating Michigan almost every year, challenging Ohio State, broke through with a Big Ten championship with a one-loss team in 2010, team that finished in the top 10. And ever since 2010, except for that big aberration that 2 years ago in going 3-9, and they were even good enough to play within a point of Ohio State in that particular season that, of course, went to the playoff. Michigan State has been a major factor, winning Rose Bowls, winning Cotton Bowls, going to the college football playoff. A bit embarrassed there, but still, that was one game. They had a tremendous season there. So he has really maximized the talent. He's recruited much better than what they had. And now I think, Alex, he's getting to the point where he is starting to benefit from his reputation. So he took a middling roster and immediately after, I think, one 500 type season started to win big with middling talent, like top 50 talent. Then he started to up the ante and start to bring in some better recruits, but because of a number of factors, who he has to recruit against, where he's placed in the state of Michigan, and there being a perception about Michigan State football of not being elite, he was able to, and I think because he's actually looking for fits for his program. He's not necessarily, it's always, I got to go after that guy because he's top 3 at his position. No, this other guy, I actually see him fitting in our offense a little bit better, and he's like a top 50 player. He doesn't care. He's going to go after the guys that he believes are going to fit the Michigan State way of playing football. And so he's increased the value of the recruiting classes to more of a top 30 to 35 range. But when you think about top 30 to 35 talent playing within the top 10 of the nation most years over the last 7 or 8 years, it's been pretty astounding what Mark Antonio has been able to do there at Michigan State. And now just here in the last couple of years, we're seeing where, because of the reputation, because of the brand that's been built by him, he's starting to get some even better talent, and we'll see what he's able to do with that. In terms of this year's team, you're exactly right. They bring back more starters from a good team than anybody in the country. They are pretty much locked in with each positional unit coming back. They lose a couple players that were key last year. Brian Lewerke at quarterback, of course, really underrated receivers. They're really explosive on the outside, and the offensive line, as we've come to expect, is formidable. The defense is extremely strong, and it's, as you mentioned, like 19 or 20 starters coming back. It's maybe the highest number that I've ever seen. And I've heard some metrics that state that the returning starter statistic is kind of outdated. And I don't think that you can go to either end of the spectrum with that analysis. When it was taken as returning starters, well, this is everything. That was a bit overblown because you've got schools like Ohio State, who 2 years ago had the youngest team in the Power 5 and go to the playoff because they're that talented. So talent wins over experience most of the time, but the experience is certainly needs to be regarded. And I think the other factors, obviously, along the offensive line in certain units, and because of packages on defense, you don't always know who the starters are. So it's a rough statistic, but it gives indication to a good team that beat Penn State, that beat Michigan, that lost in overtime to Northwestern. Really, the only failed outing for Michigan State was just going to Columbus and getting just blown out by Ohio State, and that probably coming at a bad time. That was the week after the Iowa game for Ohio State. I don't think they were real happy after losing at Iowa City and having everybody talk about them being overrated that week. So then they take on Michigan State, and it's 35-0 at halftime. So they ran into an angry Ohio State team. But other than that, legit top 15, 10-3 team that's so coming back. The only question, obviously, is the competition in the division. I happen to like a few of the other teams a little bit better, but I would not be shocked if Michigan State was able to pull off a division championship. We've got a few comments on the chat, Alex, that I'll point you to, that I'll kind of condense all them into one narrative, and that's what conference has the best shot of producing 2 teams to make it to the college football playoff. Could have happened 2 years ago with Ohio State, Penn State. It didn't, but then the College Football Playoff Committee finally kind of broke that trend and showed us that it's possible with this Alabama-Georgia selection last year. So for those conferences that have the best chance of just being considered so strong that they could put 2 teams into the field.
Yeah, I think once again, it's probably going to be the SEC. I know that's not what a lot of people want to hear, but that's probably the most realistic prediction right there. You've got Alabama and Georgia, who respectively both should win their divisions. Both could be undefeated going into the SEC championship game. I know I have Alabama at 12-0 on the year. I haven't done my Georgia predictions yet, but I do expect them to do extremely well. So if they both meet in that SEC championship game undefeated and it stays a close game, neither team blows one or the other out, I could see the committee making them, once again, like the number 1 seed, the number 4 seed, somewhere along there. It's just the talent is too good at both of those schools to leave them out if those records are what they are. If I had to choose another conference that could possibly happen, and that's not the SEC, I would probably have to go over to the Big Ten, where I'm pretty high also on Ohio State this year. I can easily see them getting back to the Big Ten championship, getting in to the college football playoff, and depending on who their opponent is in the Big Ten championship, whether it's Wisconsin again or somebody like that, it probably will be Wisconsin. I don't see anybody competing against Wisconsin in their division for that spot in the Big Ten championship. I could see maybe both of them sneaking in there. That's going to solely depend on Wisconsin's record as well. Their schedule is a lot tougher this year than it was last year. Last year, everybody was talking about how Wisconsin's schedule was too weak. They only played 2 games against ranked opponents. I think it was Iowa and Michigan, who were both lowly ranked at the time. And so their strength of schedule, they said, wasn't great enough for them to slip into the playoff, maybe with that one loss to Ohio State in the Big Ten championship. So with that schedule being a lot more tougher this year, if they can steal some of those games on the road, steal some of those games against the tougher ranked opponents, maybe if they're undefeated or maybe even just a one-loss team, but beat Ohio State in the Big Ten championship, maybe both of them could sneak in there. But I would put my money solely on the SEC with Alabama and Georgia. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens again.
You know, I tend to agree. Alabama showed some vulnerability at certain points last season, but they were able to escape. Of course, they did lose the Iron Bowl, but think about it. The 2 toughest opponents on Alabama's schedule, most likely, are Auburn and Mississippi State. Possibly LSU, possibly Texas A&M. We'll see how the season plays out. But as it stands right now on paper, Auburn is definitely the best team on the schedule. And Mississippi State is probably second. Alabama struggled in those 2 games last year, but they had to play those on the road, and they get the return trip this year. And I try not to just look at, okay, they're at home. This is a huge advantage. They're going to win these games. Oh, they got to go on the road. This could be difficult. We know better than that. But there is a sizable advantage. It is a distinct advantage. I'm not going to say it's overwhelming, but if there's a 50-50 matchup in college football, and we're talking about power programs that have daunting schedules, that have overwhelming, intimidating type atmospheres at home, like LSU or Clemson, Ohio State, et cetera, down the road, I think it shifts a 50-50 game to like a 55-45 situation, maybe 60-40. So it's a clear advantage to the home team. And Alabama has those two games at home this year. And so I look at that Alabama schedule and I see predictions of 10-2 from certain people. And I don't find any losses in that schedule. They play a collection of teams in their division that are really good teams, but they're like top 25 kind of teams. They're not top 5 kind of teams. And I just don't see anybody being able to pull that out. Now, if they had to go to Auburn again, they had to go to Mississippi State again, if they had to play somebody out of the Eastern Division who was really good, but it's Kentucky and Tennessee, I believe, out of the other division. So, and they don't have the big non-conference game. I know Louisville's, again, kind of on that fringe of the top 25 type team, but I don't expect that to be a major obstacle for them. What's interesting for all these conferences, and the SEC will get more of the benefit of the doubt than anybody else, and probably the Big Ten second, is it starts to build a narrative within the first 3 weeks of the season as to who is the strongest conference. So the Big Ten, that Eastern Division, is considered so formidable that if they go out and take care of business out of conference, then the situation could be where the College Football Playoff Committee is saying, okay, what people thought is reality. And if Ohio State goes out there and is dominant against TCU, and Michigan beats Notre Dame, and Michigan State beats Arizona State, which is expected, but if they look impressive, and then, of course, who am I missing? Penn State doesn't really have a challenging out-of-conference game. But if they run the table and look impressive, then, okay, well, if they're just beating each other, then all this is showing us that they have to face each other. They can beat teams outside the division. So if there's a benefit of the doubt that's going to be swung, it might be an undefeated Ohio State team that loses a Big Ten championship game, or had already lost to Penn State and then runs the table and beats a Wisconsin that's undefeated, but then loses to Ohio State by a field goal in the Big Ten championship. Some kind of scenario like that. That's similar to what could have played out or will in the SEC as well. So it, for as much as I want to say that it's going to be chaos and a bunch of 2-loss teams, and I want to see the committee placed in a difficult position to distinguish between resumes, there are some really good teams out there that don't face the best competition throughout the season, Alabama being one of them. And Georgia, without that Notre Dame kind of trip, they don't have that game this year. They've got Georgia Tech at the end of the season, who's going to be, I think, much improved, but not really in Georgia's league. And so that seems to be how that's going to play out. I know you like somebody in particular, Alex, in the Big 12.
Yes. For me, for one, I actually like West Virginia a lot this year. I know a lot of people are really high on Oklahoma and Texas, and a lot of people are projecting Texas to be really good this year, maybe challenge Oklahoma for a spot in the Big 12 championship. But I'm not sleeping on the Mountaineers over at West Virginia. I truly believe that Will Grier is one of the better quarterbacks in the nation, assuming he can stay healthy. He put up some really, really good numbers last year at West Virginia before he got hurt towards the end of the season. He brings in a very solid wide receiver core, obviously led by David Sills, but has plenty of other talent around him. And the only concern on my part is their defense a little bit, but I know they got some solid transfers in over the offseason on that defensive side of the ball that I think can maybe boost that team a little bit. If you look at West Virginia, they struggled towards the end of last season, and it was only because Will Grier got hurt. I think they were an 8-win team, 7-win team, but I think had he stayed healthy, they easily could have been a 9-win team, maybe winning their bowl game. He is going to be the game changer for this Mountaineers team, and I could really see them threatening the Oklahoma, who West Virginia hosts in the season finale. So they're going to have home field advantage there. I can see them threatening Texas and maybe trying to work their way up into a Big 12 championship spot. Maybe not a college football playoff crasher, but definitely a team that you don't want to sleep on in the Big 12. They've got plenty of talent. They open up the season against Tennessee. So while that's not a huge matchup in terms of Tennessee being a ranked opponent, is still a solid Power 5 opponent at a neutral site, and I think they'll get the win there. So that's obviously an impressive win on their resume. So they're definitely not a team you want to sleep on at all. I really think they could give Oklahoma a fight towards the top of the Big 12 standings.
Yeah, Tennessee's going to be, I would expect, a borderline bowl team this year. Dismissed the 0-8. Things kind of crumbled on them. They had injuries like nobody's business last year. And I'm not excusing Butch Jones because he certainly had a good thing going there for a few years and let it slip away from him. But West Virginia is not going to, most likely, unless it's a turnover fest, most likely just going to steamroll Tennessee. They just have too much talent. And I bet if you lined up position by position, Tennessee versus West Virginia, and just rated the player in terms of talent, that actually Tennessee may have a little bit more talent than West Virginia, but West Virginia just has a more cohesive team, and they've got the guy running the show on offense, as you mentioned, Will Grier, with all the playmakers, and they're just ready, and they are ready-made to take a shot at the Big 12 championship. They've got personnel in place that have been there together for quite some time, and Tennessee is just trying to build something, and they're just going to be getting their feet wet and getting accompanied and acclimated, I should say, to Jeremy Pruitt's system. And that first year is often not a good one for a first-year head coach trying to turn over a program and turn over a mindset. But I believe Tennessee is going to put up a bit of a fight in that game. I'm going to direct us to the live chat here. I want to say a few highs out there, so if I don't get to you, certainly don't be offended. But we got Lamar on the line, who gave me a compliment on my shirt right out of the gate, but I'm probably sure that he regretted and wanted to retract that comment once the camera shot went to Alex with a much better look than myself. But I appreciate it nonetheless. Cash Boy D, Country Boy, Mark Reed. I believe this is the first time I've seen Mark on the line with a resounding Michigan statement. Go Blue. Panther Pro 22, of course, and Lamar, as I mentioned, jumping into the World Cup conversation. Panther Pro 22, Iron Cross, some of the regulars right out of the gate. Chris Vaughn, this might be the first time I've seen that name, so welcome to Mark Rogers TV as well. Obviously an LSU fan. And Alex, I'll let you know that regardless of what we're talking about, the chat typically turns into some type of LSU Miami debate about who's going to win that game. A lot of LSU folks watching me, a lot of Miami fans, and they just start in on the LSU Miami war each and every time. Yeah, as I mentioned, a number of people had commented about what division or conference could produce two teams in the playoff. Lamar, Florida State, Auburn, instrumental in Bama and Georgia getting in. I don't know how. Okay, anyway. This Michigan State, so Panther Pro 22, not necessarily liking Michigan State, thinks they're overrated, fourth in the division. Okay, well, let's understand that the fourth team in the division, you know, this could be like one team going 11-1 and the other three are 10-2, or the fourth place team's 9-3 and 7-2 in the Big Ten, or 6-3 in the Big Ten. This is an extremely good foursome, and the fourth place team may not be that awful in this situation. So I tend to agree with Panther Pro 22 without revealing my predictions or going there at this point, that I just think the talent level at Michigan State is just a grade below the other three. And now that Shea Patterson's in place at Michigan, I'm fascinated to see whether Jim Harbaugh's track record of developing quarterbacks and putting them in the right system to fit their needs, Andrew Luck, Colin Kaepernick, on down the line, will take hold with Shea Patterson, and suddenly we see a Michigan offense, not just at quarterback, because they've recruited extremely well at wide receiver. The offensive line has been porous by Michigan standards. They haven't upgraded there, but they have two really good running backs in Higdon and Chris Davis, whether they will, or Chris Evans. So whether the Michigan offense will take off, because it has been like historically bad. Them going 8-4 last year with an offense that ranked lower than 100th in all the metrics, not just the standard, they don't score many points or they don't put up many total yards. Even the efficiency metrics pointed to Michigan just having a deplorable offense last year. Whether that improves, and it should significantly, I would think. If it doesn't, then they have real problems there, and maybe Jim Harbaugh is not the right guy for the job. I'll continue to scan the chat. You can give me any thoughts that you have, Alex, whether you want to take it to the Pac-12 or pick up on anything that I've mentioned.
I'll touch a little bit on what you just said with Michigan, which I know I focus a lot on Michigan State, a team that I do like, but I don't want to take anything away from that division. You're right. Someone said Michigan State could finish, fourth in the division, something like that. And that is extremely possible. Fourth in the division, maybe those three losses, if they have three losses, could be the three teams that are ahead of them. They have, like I said, I agree that the talent level might be a little bit below Ohio State. Michigan is a team that I do like a lot this year. But I'm very curious to see the Shea Patterson effect for Michigan. Like I said, I'm curious to see if Harbaugh can direct him and get him in the right direction, develop him into a solid starting quarterback. Honestly, I was more impressed with Jordan Ta'amu down at Ole Miss than I was with Shea Patterson. He definitely had signs of brilliance, had plenty of great plays, and is a solid quarterback. And I think he will be a good fit at Michigan. But I was more impressed with Ta'amu than I was Patterson. So I'm curious to see, is he getting too much hype, or is he going to be the real deal? That's something I'm really excited to see kind of how he does there, because, you know, remember, he kind of rushed onto the scene. I think it was Chad Kelly getting injured, Shea Patterson comes in, and then I think Shea Patterson got injured, Jordan Ta'amu comes in, so there was just, he never really got to start for an entire season. So I'm curious to see how he handles the role as full-time starter for a Michigan program that has a lot of high expectations going into this year. And then I can bounce over to the Pac-12 a little bit. We can talk there. Obviously, I know one team that a lot of people are high on, Oregon, with Justin Herbert at quarterback. I'm very curious to see how they do this year. You know, Willie Taggart bolting after 1 year to take the Florida State job. But I think they've handled that fairly well, promoting Mario Cristobal in from within the program to head coach, someone the players are familiar with. They lost that bowl game, I know, when he as his first game to Boise State in Las Vegas. But I think that was a smart move by the Oregon administration to keep him there from inside the program. So I'm very excited to see how they do. They lost a couple of key players on both sides of the ball. But Oregon could be a team that poses a little bit of threat in the Pac-12. I still think for the winner of the Pac-12 is going to be Washington, a team that I like a lot this year. Never want to doubt Chris Peterson. Very solid offense with Jake Browning and Myles Gaskins. Feels like those two guys have been there forever. So I'm really excited to see how they do this year. Could they get back to the college football playoff after missing out last year? USC, a team that I don't really think is going to do extremely well, could compete to win their division, but with the loss of Sam Darnold, I'm curious to see how they're able to bounce back, find themselves a new starter, see how they can compete there. And then a team I'm just excited to watch in general is Arizona State with Herm Edwards leading the Sun Devils. I mean, it's going to be a lot of fun to watch out in the desert. Might not produce great results, but I'm really excited to see him back into the coaching game and just see what he can do. I think if you give him a couple years, he can turn the Sun Devils into a pretty decent program. But I'm obviously very excited to watch him coach this year.
So we've got on the chat a number of interesting items. Ricky noting, as we discussed, the D'Antonio era, 8-2 against Michigan. They only lost in the 3-9 season, and then they had a 7-6 campaign that ended with a win in the Buffalo Wild Wings Bowl against TCU in like 2012. That was a Michigan loss as well. Otherwise, Michigan State, yes, dominating Michigan, even if it takes a miracle or two once in a while, like in the rainstorm with the one time in the rainstorm, and the other time more famously a couple of years back with the dropped exchange of the punt snap and then the ball thrown up in the air, and Michigan State catches it, where the punter, the game was over. The punter, even though I know the gut reaction is I got to do something with this, or I'm going to get tackled for a 50-yard loss or whatever, but you could have gotten tackled for the 12-yard loss. It didn't matter. Don't throw the ball up in the air and let the other team score a touchdown with no time on the clock to win the game. But so sometimes luck plays into it as well. And as I like to mention to people, Alex, in 2015, Ohio State, consensus #1, trips up against that Michigan State team. That if that fumble doesn't happen on the snap against Michigan, Michigan State has an additional loss. That means the Michigan State win over Ohio State doesn't matter. Ohio State wins and goes to the Big Ten championship game and most likely steamrolls Iowa, and they're in the playoff. But because of that missed exchange on the punt, that creates a tie for the Big Ten division in the East, and Michigan State obviously beats Ohio State with a buzzer-beating field goal of sorts. So Michigan State goes to the college football playoff, a Michigan State team that was earned the right. I'm not discounting what they earned, but with a loss to a 5-7 Nebraska team that year, and with a miracle against Michigan, don't know that they were necessarily ready for that stage, and it proved at 38-0. Meanwhile, in the SEC, Alabama had a similar circumstance, losing to Ole Miss, who's appeared to be the second best team in the division, or maybe the best team in the division. But as you will remember, Ole Miss went to Arkansas later that year, and they had control of the division, and Hunter Henry decided to throw a ball over his head because that's all he could do. So it was actually a good play because it's 4th and 25, so the game's over if you don't do something with the ball. And he's got a tackler wrapped around him, and he's about to step out of bounds and just throws the ball over his head, and it goes into a mass of bodies. And Alex Collins, I believe, was the player who pulled it out and runs for a touchdown. That knocks Ole Miss out of Atlanta and sends Bama to the SEC championship game. And so Ohio State basically lost to the wrong team, and Alabama didn't. So sometimes that's the way it needs to happen to open up a playoff path for a certain team and shut somebody else out.
Yeah, that's just what makes college football so great. It's scenarios like that when you've got a team that loses someone they shouldn't to, or losing in a dramatic fashion like that, and the way all these tie-breaking rules work, the head-to-head tiebreakers, like we see with Alabama and Ole Miss, or in Ohio State, Michigan State. That's just what makes it so great and so exciting for the fans, and also so heartbreaking for the fans as well. As a guy that has watched college football, not as long as you, of course, but for a while, it's hard to watch your team do something like that, and at the end of the season look back and think, oh, what if this had happened? What if Ohio State? What if Michigan had beaten Michigan State then that loss wouldn't have mattered. It's very hard to look at that and look at how good a season could have been or what could have happened had just one minor thing changed. And then that's just what I love about it so much is every play truly matters. Sometimes fate does play a big role in it. Sometimes, the football gods, as some people call them, play a role in some of these games. But that's just what makes it so much fun to watch and so unpredictable. That's why even myself doing these preseason predictions, they're so difficult to get right because you just truly never know what's going to happen on a given play in a given scenario. But you're right. I've seen it too many times before, and that really does spark great debate among the committee and among the analysts like you and me when we see a game like that. Think does this team truly deserve to be in? But a win's a win. So someone could say, well, they barely beat this team. Well, the only reason they won that game is because of that lucky play, the Alex Collins play, or the muff fumble play on the punt. But a win is a win, a loss is a loss, and you really have to look at that at the end of the day. But I agree with you 100% on that.
We're on the line with Alex Galbraith. You can join him at the Gridiron Expert right here on YouTube. So check out his channel for prognostications, predictions, setting up the Heisman race, all things college football in regards to getting us set for 2018 and what might take place. Alex, I'm looking at the chat, and I'm going to decipher a few things here. I don't necessarily know that everyone's understanding of what a sleeper pick is. So I don't want to hold you to this. So you're considering Michigan State, but you haven't made your prediction yet.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, so let's not hold Alex, first of all, to a Michigan State prediction to win the Big Ten or the Big Ten East. He's just pointing out that Mark Antonio knows what he's doing. This has been proven over and over and over and over. I would say that Mark Antonio, the roughly 3 times that he's won the Big Ten championship, he didn't have the best team. He didn't have the best talent, and he won the Big Ten championship. And obviously, again, resurrecting his own, so he needs to take ownership of the 3 wins. It's not like he took over a program with 3 wins. So he did have the aberration at 3 wins and bounces right back. So let's understand here. Panther Pro 22 jumps in with his sleeper playoff picks of Stanford, Florida State, Michigan, Mississippi State. And somebody's mentioning on here that Mississippi State's going to finish 4th in the SEC West. They're not a sleeper. Michigan State's going to finish 4th in the Big Ten East. They're not a sleeper. Well, actually, they are a sleeper because if they're picked to finish 1st in the division, Ohio State's not a sleeper. Everyone's picking them, or 90% of the people are picking them to win the division. So they're not a sleeper. Michigan State, I'm guessing like 5% of the fan base or the media or the experts would select Michigan State. 5 to 10% would pick them to win the Big Ten East. Therefore, they are a sleeper. That's the definition of a sleeper, is that they are not expected to win the conference or the division or win a championship. Let's see, what else do we have here? So, Alex, Miami, I believe, could play into a scenario that's similar to what we're talking about in the SEC and the Big Ten. If you look at their schedule, Florida State has like talent. They're the only team on the roster, on the schedule, that has a roster comparable to Miami. They do have to go to Blacksburg to take on Virginia Tech. And they do, of course, have the LSU. So LSU fans, stop right there. Only team in the ACC that has a like schedule or a like roster to Miami is Florida State. Yes, LSU. I don't care what LSU finishes this year. If they finish 4-8, they still have one of the 10 to 15 best rosters in the country in terms of sheer talent. So, yeah, Miami has to run into 2 teams that are just as fast and quick, and players can jump just as high and do the whole thing. To a lesser extent, Boston College will be a tough out. And again, going to Virginia Tech is never an easy assignment. But if Miami, being the better of the 2 teams basically every week, gets to a championship game against Clemson, I think if they show up against Clemson, even if they're undefeated, and they lose another 38-3 game, the College Football Playoff Committee is probably going to say, yeah, you showed who you are again. You're out. But if they show up and lose by a touchdown, and that's their first loss of the season, then maybe we've got a similar scenario in the ACC.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And I could see that kind of the scenario you just drew up reminds me a lot of the Ohio State-Wisconsin scenario of last year, where Wisconsin went undefeated during the regular season, played Ohio State, and it was close. But then you look at their strength of schedule, and it wasn't great. It was a very close game for Wisconsin, but due to their strength of schedule, it just wasn't good enough for them. Even though they lost just, well, I think it was a touchdown, couldn't get into the college football playoff. And that's exactly what could happen with Miami. Like you said, Florida State, I believe that game's at home for Miami, so that helps a little bit. But yeah, that's by far their biggest test. Virginia Tech, obviously a good test, solid quarterback in Josh Jackson. Still a bit of a young team though, should have a decent defense, but I would think Miami could take care of business there. But you're right, last year things were looking really, really good for Miami. I think they were number 2, and I think had they not tripped up against Pittsburgh, I mean, the loss to Clemson was just horrendous. So I think even if they had beaten Pittsburgh, losing that bad to Clemson would have put them out. But that would have drawn up some interesting discussion of, okay, they lost. That's their lone loss. Could they still get in? Could they maybe slip to the 4th seed and stay in there and get 2 ACC teams in? But you're right. I think Miami has a solid chance of potentially finishing the season undefeated. And then it's more than likely going to come down to that Clemson game. And this is a Clemson team that I think has the best defensive line in the country. Very, very solid. Dabo Swinney's done a great job recruiting there. Their quarterback situation, some people want Trevor Lawrence, the true freshman, to start. Some people want Kelly Bryant, who got them to the college football playoff last year, want him to start. So that's a bit of an interesting kind of conversation there, debate there. But with Miami potentially facing off against Clemson, and Clemson maybe being undefeated as well, could you have another scenario there, as we did in the SEC with an Alabama-Georgia, where if that game's close, could you potentially have both those teams making the playoff? Or if Miami loses that game and it is close, could they potentially still stay in? I'm very curious to see both of those races in the ACC. But you are right. Miami's schedule, like Alabama's, I can picture it the same way, is very, very, very favorable. Their toughest test they're getting at home. So the Hurricanes could be poised for another great season under Mark Richt.
So as we have more people joining the chat, would like to let you know that Alex Galbraith is the Gridiron Expert, and please continue to join him at his YouTube channel, the Gridiron Expert. He's also started a Twitter account, the Gridiron Expert. Join him there, again, for prognostications on the conference races, the college football playoff situation, and also the Heisman race that we may or may not get to. If we don't today, Alex and I can come back and handicap the Heisman race as well. Want to let you know that Alex is going to be joining me here at Mark Rogers TV to produce even more content and help me behind the scenes with some marketing, branding, social media, and so forth to help the cause right here. So I appreciate Alex and his support, definitely. So we're excited about our partnership. So scheduling plays such a factor. And Alex, you really approach it in the right way in regards to, if I'm going to make NFL predictions like I used to, I do game to game, but I used to sit down before the season and make NFL predictions. Haven't really, just because I do it, I have friends that still text me like 5 minutes before the 1 o'clock kickoff on the first Sunday and say, who's your Super Bowl prediction? And I go, Pittsburgh and Green Bay. It's not well thought out anymore, but I used to go through the metrics and the whole deal. And I didn't pay much attention to schedules. Yes, there are tougher schedules and less tough schedules in the NFL, but basically there's such a talent quotient that's close from one team to 32 within the NFL. The schedules don't matter that much. The best team in the league is not going to get, if they're truly the best team and Super Bowl bound, they're not going to get hampered by a schedule that's going to knock them out of the playoffs. Yeah, a team may not be quite good enough to make the playoffs against a really difficult schedule and they caught a couple schedule breaks and they finish 9-7 and make the 6th seed. That may happen. Sure, it does. But in college football, man, the schedule is seriously a factor in all of this. And it drives me nuts. And if you caught any of my content, Alex, about scheduling, I would love to balance it out from both the conference and non-conference standpoint, but I'm not going to go into that right now. And that's one of the reasons why you look at certain sleeper scenarios, like in Iowa. And there's a lot of LSU talk on the chat. And I mentioned to somebody the other night, we were talking about the metrics, and it was a numbers cruncher that I have on, Jake Wimberly. And I said, because he has Iowa projected at 11-1, which I think is a little strong, and has LSU projected, I believe, at 5-7. And I said, there's the schedule factor that drives me crazy in college football, because it's not as though the Big Ten's awful and the SEC is just so strong that LSU has to make it through this gauntlet and Iowa plays in the worst conference by far. It's that we've got two conferences that are generally vying for top spot in the nation, but just because Iowa catches the breaks within its schedule and scheduled light in the non-conference, and LSU loaded up with Miami, and then they've got to face the SEC West. These are two teams that if they met tomorrow on a neutral field, we would have no idea who's going to win that game. LSU and Iowa. It's a toss-up in my mind, but LSU is going to struggle to go to 7 or 8 wins, you would think, and Iowa has a chance to maybe have a big season. They certainly have the opportunities there. So scheduling factors into this a ton, and you can speak to that in regards to looking at some of your dark horse picks and looking across the nation as well.
Yeah, well, you're exactly right. And the one thing I do like about scheduling, the only one complaint I do not have is that in the Power 5 conferences, they are requiring teams to play at least another Power 5 team. And I really like that. You've got your Michigan playing at Notre Dame and LSU, Miami, Alabama's playing Louisville. Teams like that where they have to play another Power 5 team. Maybe it won't be the best, but at least it is not another FCS school or a Sun Belt school, one of those weaker group of 5 teams. And I did catch some of your kind of fixed scheduling that you did some analysis on, and you're right. If you look at a team, and I'll just use Alabama just because of their dominance, you look at the teams they draw from the East. Of course, every team's going to play the teams in their division. SEC, they're going to play the other 6 teams in the SEC West or the East, and same in the Big Ten, ACC, and so forth. But you look at Alabama that this year I think draws Missouri and Tennessee from the East. Obviously not your top 2 teams. I mean, how, every year you're going to have a different schedule, the way it's made, the way who you schedule. But wouldn't it be great to see an Alabama Georgia in the regular season, or something like that, where they're playing a team up to that type of level and not having to play a team that's much weaker. Alabama has 2 games against Sun Belt opponents plus an FCS school, so a quarter of their schedule are extremely easy teams, extremely blowout wins for them. So, and that's something you have to keep in mind, where you could have an LSU that has a much tougher schedule, or an Iowa that has a very favorable schedule. Part of that you can't fix. Part of that might be because of the division that they're in. It's just weaker. It's just a weaker division. But outside of that, or the teams they play in cross division, I do think it's something that needs to change, because you know, like you said, you could have an LSU, someone predicts them to go 5-7, Iowa 11-1, but you put those 2 teams on neutral field, no one knows what's going to happen. Part of that's due to the strength of the conference. Part of that's due to the talent of the team. But I do think that some things need to change, especially within the cross-division teams that you would be facing for a given team. The non-conference is usually okay. I, for one, think maybe we should ban it to maybe 1 FCS or 1 group of 5 team for each Power 5 team, because it just makes it more exciting, more interesting, and then you wouldn't have the complaints about strength of schedule or in stuff like that. I mean, Alabama, I feel it could be in the same situation as Wisconsin, where if they slip up 1 point this season to an Auburn, to Mississippi State, to Ole Miss on the road, I don't know, but they slip up to someone like that, they could be in danger of saying, hey, your schedule wasn't that good. Sorry, you're gonna fall out. So that's something to really keep in mind as we go forward. Do I think anything's going to change in the future? Probably not, but it's always a good debate and something to really think about, and something to use when you're analyzing the season.
And this has been the byproduct of these conference expansion situations, in which these conferences that were once 8 and 10 teams are now 14 team leagues. And so you can't play everyone, and you can't even come close to playing everyone. In the ACC and the SEC, every team misses 5 other teams in the conference. That creates the disparity, first and foremost. The other, these ridiculous designations of rivalries. So I completely agree that we have to protect the Florida State-Miami game. So as Alex described, everyone plays everyone in your own division. This is how it's formatted. And then you have a designated team to play in the other division that you play every year. Alabama plays Tennessee, Georgia plays Auburn, etc. And I want to protect those games. But the league took it to the standpoint that we have to designate a team for everyone. And I don't think that's necessary. And then the other games rotated. The 8th game, so Alabama will only see Georgia once every 6 years, because you take Tennessee out of the mix, once every 6 years, I believe. And that's how that works. I say protect the rivalry games. So in the ACC, there's only a couple. There's Florida State, Miami cross division, and there's North Carolina State. Other than that, I can't think of one. For Boston College and Virginia Tech to be connected as rivals makes absolutely no sense. Just secure those 2 games, Florida State, Miami, and the North Carolina State game. And the others, you give the schedulers flexibility to then match up what would appear to be a schedule of equity. So the best example I have of this, and then I'll drop the subject because I think I'm probably losing people with this, but it just drives me crazy. So about 5 years ago, when Alabama and LSU were clearly the 2 best teams in the SEC West, and LSU was LSU, there was one particular year. So they are battling for a division championship. So they all play the same other 6 teams within the SEC West. Alabama played 2 teams from the other division who the previous season, I believe it was that year, Kentucky and Missouri, or Kentucky and Vandy, 2 teams that went 2-14 in the SEC the previous season. LSU played Georgia and Florida, who the previous season went 14-2 in the SEC. So you're matching up 2 teams who are in direct competition for a division championship and saying these 5 games are exactly the same. Then, of course, you're playing each other. And then one of you plays 2 teams that went 14-2 last year. The other one of you is going to play 2 teams that went 2-14, and that's supposed to be fair.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's not. It's just not fair, and it's. Like I said, I don't think that's ever going to change, because you look at these teams and you think, okay, well, how were we going to know? Because the SEC and conferences put these schedules together way in advance, at least who they're going to play within the conference. So, how are we going to know how these teams are going to fare, 5 years from now? Or, they could be really good, could be really bad. But you're right, it's not fair, especially in that case for an LSU who lost to Alabama, I'm sure, in that game when they faced off. And so that's your only loss. You look at Alabama that could have gone undefeated and say, well, sure, but 2 of their conference wins were against, Vanderbilt and Kentucky, who posed no threat whatsoever. And it's extremely unfair, but unfortunately, I just don't see that changing. I agree with you that we do need to protect the rivalries. That is a given. Do not take those away. Don't try to change those at all. But your other team that you're playing cross-division needs to be fixed to whether you're matching it up with someone that's on a similar playing level, or maybe you rotate a little bit, but you exclude a couple teams that you rotate with out of those extra 5. I don't know how they exactly would do it, but you're exactly right that the scheduling does need to change a little bit, and it's very shocking if you actually go back like you've done and look at the records and look at the stats, how shocking and how big of a difference that those games can make.
Yeah, and it's a little bit more difficult than I have sized up, but it's not that difficult. It takes just a little time and analysis to get it close to equitable. So, for example, Alabama plays Tennessee. I want to protect that rivalry. I don't think a lot of people outside the SEC are really cognizant of Alabama and Tennessee being a rivalry, but believe me, it's important. It means something. It needs to be protected. But since Tennessee has to play Alabama, who was a 7-1 team in the other division, also give them Auburn. For Tennessee, they get to play Alabama and Auburn. They went 7-1, 7-1. They're playing 2 14-2 composite teams from last year. Balance that out with the game against Arkansas and give that to Tennessee, and then move on from there. But and it's also a situation where actually in the Big 12, the Big 12 was made fun of when they had to drop their championship game, and I understand that. I love the conference championship games. I want them to stay intact. But actually the Big 12, not by their own genius or intellect, but by default, they play the purest conference race because everybody just plays everyone. And so everyone has the same schedule. So it's fair. It's equitable. In the Pac-12, it's close because if you look at it, they play a 9-game season. They only have 12 teams, so you only miss 2 teams. So there's a ton of overlap, and the schedules aren't that varied. But there is some play with the schedule there in the Pac-12. You mentioned Oregon being a sleeper. When I look to the South, and I need to do a little bit more research on, I really want to look at Oregon, which I have to a certain extent because I think what's lost is they have Jim Leavitt on defense as their defensive coordinator, and they went from like a top 80 defense in 2016 to like a top 25 defense last year. He's a former South Florida head coach, tremendous defensive coordinator. The one championship season that Colorado had in making the Pac-12 title game, he was their defensive coordinator. He goes to Oregon, improves them that much, and they have 3 or 4 total studs, NFL like top 3 round picks on their defense. They're a bit thin in regards to depth, but they have playmakers on defense. We know what they've got at quarterback and some of the skill positions. So Oregon's an interesting call. As you mentioned, I do think Washington is the best team, but I think they have to travel to Oregon. And in the South, I believe you're completely right about USC. It's going to be difficult because they loaded up with Texas and Notre Dame non-conference. So again, kudos to USC and some of these other teams that are now, I divert for a quick second, but to address your scheduling point, the schedules, for as much as I bash on the non-conference schedules, they are so much better than they were even 10 years ago. So we went from a place where there were some Power 5 matchups in the non-conference, and there were a ton of teams running around out there like a Baylor who never played anyone in the Power 5 non-conference. I saw an alarming stat that still holds true to this day, that Baylor has not played a top 25 team out of conference since the mid-90s. So there were a lot of those type schedules, and then came the pressure to schedule a Power 5. And now there's the pressure to schedule a second Power 5. So there's probably a third of the teams within the Power 5 structure that are scheduling now 2 Power 5s. So there are a lot of tough schedules out there, like a USC playing both Notre Dame and Texas. So that brings me to the point, with a new quarterback in play for USC, they could have a rough go similar to what they had with Sam Darnold taking over for Max Brown early in 2016 after they blew a few games against Stanford and were annihilated by Alabama. They got off to the rough start. They started 1-3. Sam Darnold steps in, and then he plays a really good game against Utah. They lose in the closing seconds, and then they go on a run. We may see something similar to that with USC, where they are factored out of the national scene early, but they turn out to be, they've got the best roster in the division. I don't think it's debatable. But where somebody like a Utah, who's just got a really solid team, returning quarterback, running back, 1,000-yard rusher, and a defense that's extremely solid, maybe Utah jumps into the fray and they're able to pull out a division championship, and they're a true sleeper.
Yeah, it's very, very possible. I'm with you that USC owns in that division, the South Division, owns the talent aspect over everybody else. I don't know the exact schedules for USC. I don't know where that Utah game is being played. That could be probably the biggest game on USC's schedule, and in terms of determining who would win that division. But you're right. I have a lot of faith in Clay Helton and what he's done at USC. Give him a lot of credit for what he's done there. You know, you take over a team that every year has very, very high expectations, wants to be up on that national level, and usually ended up disappointing. But he got USC back. Starting off with Sam Darnold, running the table and getting to the Rose Bowl and beating Penn State. And last year, getting all the way to the Cotton Bowl, a New Year's Six Bowl, obviously losing to Ohio State in that game. But still, back-to-back New Year's Six Bowls for him. Extremely impressive. Like I said, talent-wise, it's great. Only concern is quarterback. But you're right. I'm not familiar with the exact quarterback situation at USC as of right now. But you know, you bring in a new guy like that. I know Helton's going to be able to kind of build him up. And like you said, it could be a situation where you give him a couple games to start, 3-4 games, and then maybe they start turning on the jet, start figuring stuff out. and who go on a bit of a run. I would not be surprised. I don't see USC getting back to a New Year's Six bowl, but I'm not going to be surprised if they end up winning their division. That wouldn't be a huge shock to me.
All right, we've got Alex Galbraith on the line from Gridiron Expert. Please join him at his YouTube channel with prognostications on the college football playoff race, division and conference races, as he predicts every game in the Power Five. And also we'll get you set for the Heisman race, which we'll discuss at a later time. Monitoring the chat and a lot of, again, picking on the Big Ten here and there. A lot of love for the LSU-Miami matchup, as I mentioned, and see every time. So as I say all the time, I appreciate the support and certainly want your suggestions on content if there's anything that you'd like to see. We're currently knocking out the top 10 at every position in college football, the top 5 positionally in each conference, as many as we can possibly get to. We have knocked out quarterback, running back, and wide receiver in the ACC. Quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end in the SEC, and we will get to as many again as possible. Check out the channel for the top 10 non-conference games for 2018, and also week by week, the under-the-radar games. I've knocked out the first 3 weeks non-conference, and I'm looking at week 4 now as well. I'm going to be rating the coaches within the conferences, and Alex, this might be a little bit aggressive, but I would like to rank the teams 130 all the way up to number 1. Don't know if I'm going to be able to pull that off, but especially a week from Monday starts conference media days with the SEC, of course, taking stage front and center first and foremost. So once they start with that, it's basically football season for anybody who covers football, because they go directly from the conference media days right to fall practice, and we're off and running toward that September 1st Labor Day weekend and all the big matchups. Want to announce again that Alex is going to be joining me here at Mark Rogers TV to provide even more content and also help me with some marketing, branding, and social media. So we are excited about that. All right, one other thing to take care of, one other note of business. We have a contest running, courtesy Alonzo1219, who's going to be joining me actually today at 5:30 Eastern time to talk Miami football. So Miami fans, listen up for that, 5:30 Eastern time today. But Alonzo has been kind enough to offer up some swag to whomever brings the most subs, the most subscribers to Mark Rogers TV before July 15th will win some swag. So you don't have to be a Miami fan, but you do have to be subscribed to Alonzo1219 and then bring as many subscribers as to Mark Rogers TV as you can. So the person that brings the most, and we have the counter rolling between now and July 15th, then you win some swag, and it's pretty impressive if you check out Alonzo's channel. You don't have to be a Miami fan. He has swag available that can be ordered for any team that you love in college football, or as I understand it, anyone in sports. So it's a pretty sweet deal. All right, we are Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. So I typically at this point, before signing off, get a ton of requests for content and for guests that you would like to see. So anyone that you offer as a guest, I will certainly reach out to them to get them as a guest here. Glenn Mason of the Big Ten Network has told us that he would appear, so we're hoping to nail him down to a particular time, and some other folks as well. Also, there was a Michigan contributor, potential guest that somebody offered up to me, and he responded that he would like to come on, so that'll be a good Michigan discussion as well. And content suggestions, I can't get to all of them, but I'm certainly keeping track of all of your content suggestions. A lot of them are in the mode of off-season, and we're kind of kicking into the point where we're going full throttle toward 2018. So a lot of historical topics and subject matters that I love to dig into, we're going to have to wait until the off-season for 2018 and 19 to dive into those. But Alex, we appreciate you taking some time here, and of course, your contribution to Mark Rogers TV, and look forward to shaking things up and expanding the reach.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be great.
All right. Again, everyone, 5:30 Eastern time, we'll be back with Miami football talk. And so that, again, LSU fans, that means you too, and Florida State fans and anyone else who wants to talk trash on the live chat about Miami. We will see you next time and appreciate all the support. Alex, we will see you as well very soon.
Yes, sir.